The day I buried my mother, I felt like the last safe place in my life had disappeared. I was 32. And suddenly completely alone. After the funeral, the bank manager called and told me my mother had left a safety deposit box in my name. I drove there the next morning still wearing black and expecting nothing more than old papers and jewelry. The box was smaller than I imagined. Inside were a few family photos, my mother's wedding ring, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her handwriting. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. The first line made my heart stop. Emma, if you are reading this, I need you to forgive me because I have lied to you every day of your life. I read the sentence again and again, unable to breathe. The letter said I was not her biological daughter. She wrote that she had loved me from the moment she first held me, but she had promised someone she would never tell me the truth. At the bottom of the letter was a small silver key taped beside a number 314. No explanation, no name, no address. I searched the box again and found an old photograph hidden beneath the velvet lining. The picture showed my mother standing beside a young woman who looked almost exactly like me. The woman was holding a baby, and on the back of the photo my mother had written, "The truth began here." A cold feeling ran through my body. My mother had never mentioned this woman in my entire life. I wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, but deep down I knew it was real. I left the bank and sat in my car staring at the key while rain hit the windshield. Then my phone rang from an unknown number. A man's voice spoke quietly. "You should not have opened that box, Emma." Before I could answer, he hung up, and when I looked in the mirror, a black SUV was parked across the street, and the driver was watching me without moving. I drove away from the bank as fast as I could, but the black SUV stayed behind me. Every time I turned a corner it turned too. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept looking at the silver key in my hand and wondering why a stranger would warn me about something my own mother had left for me. I finally pulled into a crowded grocery store parking lot, hoping the SUV would leave, but it parked several rows behind me. I stayed inside my car for almost an hour watching the driver through the mirror. He never got out, he only sat there waiting. When I reached home, I locked every door and placed the photograph on my kitchen table. The young woman in the picture had my eyes, my smile, and even the small birthmark near my left eyebrow. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. I turned the photo over again and noticed something I had missed before. A faint address was written under my mother's words. Locker 314, Eastwood Storage Facility. My hands trembled as I searched the address online. The storage facility was only 20 minutes away. I knew I should call the police, but I could not explain why I was being followed, and I could not ignore the chance to finally learn who I really was. That evening I drove to the storage facility. Just before closing, the manager checked the key and led me down a long hallway lined with metal doors. When he stopped in front of locker 314, he handed me the padlock and walked away without saying a word. I inserted the key and the lock clicked open. Inside were dozens of cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling. There were old newspapers, photographs, files, and a large metal trunk in the center of the room. I opened one of the boxes and found newspaper headlines about a missing baby girl who had disappeared 30 years ago. The article showed a photograph of the same young woman from my mother's picture. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and the missing baby was named Emma. My knees went weak as I realized I was reading my own name. Before I could open another box, I heard footsteps outside the locker. Then a shadow stopped in front of the door and a voice whispered, "Emma, you should not have come here." My heart almost stopped as the voice echoed outside the locker. I slowly stepped backward and grabbed the heavy metal trunk, ready to defend myself. The shadow stayed still for a few seconds before a tall gray-haired man walked inside. He raised both hands and quietly said he was not there to hurt me. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and whispered that I had my mother's face. He introduced himself as Daniel and said he had been my mother's closest friend for many years. He told me she had trusted him with a secret that could destroy powerful people if it was ever revealed. I demanded answers, but instead of speaking, he pointed toward the metal trunk and told me to open it first. Inside were hundreds of photographs, birth records, passports, and bundles of cash. Hidden beneath everything was a small video camera and several memory cards. Daniel picked up one of the cards and said it contained the proof my mother had protected for 30 years. Before he could explain more, loud footsteps echoed through the hallway. Someone was coming fast. Daniel quickly pushed the memory card into my hand and told me to hide it no matter what happened. He said people had been searching for it since the day I disappeared as a baby. Suddenly the locker door slammed open. 3 men wearing dark clothes rushed inside. One of them shouted to grab the girl. Daniel stepped in front of me, giving me enough time to escape through the back emergency exit. I ran as fast as I could without looking back. My heart pounded while I heard shouting behind me. I reached my car shaking and locked every door before starting the engine. I looked at the tiny memory card resting in my palm. I drove to a nearby motel instead of going home because I knew they would be waiting for me there. Inside the motel room, I borrowed an old laptop from the front desk and inserted the memory card. The screen turned black for a moment, then a video appeared. A young woman looked directly into the camera crying. She whispered, "If you are watching this, Emma, then I never got the chance to save you. I am your real mother. And everything you have been told about your life is a lie." At that exact moment, someone began knocking slowly on my motel room door. The slow knocking continued again and again. My whole body froze. I quickly closed the laptop and hid the memory card inside my shoe. Then I turned off every light in the motel room and stood silently behind the door, holding my breath. The knocking stopped for a few seconds, then a man quietly called my name. He said he was from the police and wanted to ask a few questions. Something about his voice felt wrong. I looked through the small window beside the door and saw the same black SUV parked outside. I stayed completely silent. After several long minutes, the footsteps finally disappeared. I waited until the parking lot became quiet, then opened the laptop again. The woman on the screen wiped the tears from her face and continued speaking. She said her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she had never stopped searching for me. She explained that I had not been kidnapped by strangers. I had been taken by people working for one of the richest families in the country, because my father had discovered evidence of a massive financial crime involving powerful businessmen and politicians. To keep him silent, they destroyed everything. They made the world believe both my parents had abandoned me. Then they arranged for my mother to disappear forever. Sarah looked directly into the camera and said, "If anything happens to me, trust only Daniel. He knows where the final evidence is hidden." The video suddenly ended. My phone rang immediately from another unknown number. I answered without speaking. A weak, injured voice whispered my name. It was Daniel. He sounded terrified. He said they had found him, but he had managed to escape. He begged me to meet him at an old church outside the city because he had the last piece of evidence that could expose everyone. Before I could reply, I heard loud shouting on his side of the call, then the line went silent. I rushed out of the motel carrying only the memory card and the photograph. As I drove toward the church, I noticed headlights following me again. When I finally reached the old church, the front doors were already open. Inside, the building was completely dark except for dozens of burning candles. Daniel was lying on the floor covered in blood. With his last strength, he placed a small envelope into my hand and whispered, "Your father is still alive." Then his eyes slowly closed just as heavy footsteps echoed through the church behind me. The footsteps grew louder behind me, and I turned around expecting the men who had chased me for days. Instead, an older man stepped out of the darkness surrounded by armed guards. His face looked strangely familiar, and before I could speak, he quietly said my name, "Emma." He looked into my eyes with tears running down his face and whispered that he was my father. For a moment I could not move. Everything inside me told me to run, but something in his voice felt real. He slowly raised his empty hands and begged me to open the envelope Daniel had given me. Inside was a faded birth certificate, a family photograph, and a handwritten letter. My hands trembled as I read the first lines. "Emma, if you are reading this, then Daniel kept his promise. Trust the man standing before you because he is your father and he has spent 30 years trying to bring you home." I looked back at the man and saw the same eyes, the same smile, and the same birthmark that I had carried my entire life. Before either of us could speak, gunshots echoed through the church. The armed men pushed us behind the wooden benches while masked attackers rushed inside. A fierce fight broke out, and after several terrifying minutes, police sirens surrounded the church. The attacker tried to escape, but officers arrested every one of them. The investigation lasted for months. The memory card, the documents, and Daniel's evidence exposed a criminal network that had stolen millions of dollars, kidnapped children, and murdered innocent people for decades. The powerful family behind everything lost their fortune, their influence, and their freedom. My real father was finally cleared of every false accusation, and the truth about my mother, Sarah, became national news. She had sacrificed her own life trying to protect me. The woman who raised me was honored as a hero because she had risked everything to keep me safe, even though I was not her daughter by blood. Months later, I visited both of their graves carrying white flowers. I thanked the mother who gave me life and the mother who gave me love. As I walked away, my father placed his hand on my shoulder and smiled for the first time in many years. For 30 years, I believed I had lost my family. In the end, I discovered that love had been protecting me all along, and the truth that almost destroyed my life became the reason I finally found my way home.